oftentimes something that comes up in conversations is how do you end something? Because you'll have a really good run with stuff, and then eventually you come to a point and you think, well, this is a good place to wrap it up, move on. And a week ago, when I finished up my MCU Look Back series with AntMan, finishing up Phase 1 and 2's movies, I thought that's a good place to end it. But then I thought about it and I said, you know what? I got one more in me. And so this is the surprise that I was hinting at the end of that video. This is one more that I'd worked on, and it was for Captain America Civil War. This is actually a full circle moment for the channel as well, because back when this movie came out, it was one of the first major reviews that I did. And I'd seen the movie opening day and I'd gotten back. I was so excited to talk about it on video. I remember putting it up and just pumped out of my mind. But I also remember thinking that, well, there are things that I could have done a little bit better. And so that's kind of why this video exists, because I just rewatched the movie and I thought it could use a little bit of upgrading. And so, this new format that we're working with, figured that's a good place to start. But going into Civil War, just rewatching it right now, it really reaffirms why this is one of my favorite MCU movies, and it remains so. I think this is one of the best. In fact, it's in my top 5 MCU movies even right now. And for good reason. I feel like Civil War tells the story that it needs to tell as well as it can. And in case you're wondering, yes, this t-shirt is from back then. I remember I watched the movie, I got out, there was a Macy's in the complex that I was at. I went over there, sometimes they had this bin with like graphic tees, which were like $20 a pop. And I got this, for good reason. Black Panther was one of my favorite characters in this movie. And rewatching it, it's a little harder now, especially with that aspect of it. In the time since, some tragedy has befallen with Chadwick Boseman's passing. And so to go back and watch this movie where he's introduced in such a badass way and, just the amount of potential his character held for the future, which you got to see some of with his Black Panther movie, and then also with, Infinity War and Endgame, you got those moments. It's still one of those things where it feels a little bittersweet to watch that, because he was putting on a class performance when it came to this character. And he is one of the best parts of Civil War, without a doubt. This was the big introduction for Black Panther in the MCU, and one other character who I'll get to in a minute. But really portraying the frayed, relations of the Avengers after the events of Age of Ultron and stuff that had happened along the way, where things seemed a little bit shaky every now and then for the team dynamic as is. To have that completely ruptured at such a crossroads moment in the MCU, especially as we're building into something as massive as Infinity War, where you're gonna need the team together, but you might not have them together. This was handled very, very effectively. Just putting these characters on opposing sides of each other as the Sokovia Accords are instated, and decisions are made when it comes to what kind of superheroism should take place. It went from this idea of having regulations to it to what exactly do regulations mean? Because on paper, things sound fine. It's like, hey, sometimes if the trouble is really, really bad, we're gonna need you guys, and then you guys can intervene. But otherwise, it's a little dangerous and you might be acting outside of the law. But as Steve asks really well, it's like, what if we have to go somewhere and they don't let us go because they don't think it's a problem enough? But then it could become a huge problem, and then those people are going to suffer. You can't really regulate these things because you never know where the trouble is going to come from. And that's something that is also, being taken into consideration as the arguments are being deliberated between the team members. And as sides are taken from Cap having that ideology to Tony saying, no, we need to be in check. We've made too many mistakes. Too many people have died while we were trying to kick ass, and just, seeing the collateral damage that has been caused along the way. That's also something that you sort of see where he's coming from too. Although as the movie goes on, you can still, you can kind of put together where it is that you should be landing on. And that simple fact is that, look, the fight is the fight. You never know how it's going to play out. And that's essentially the crux of it. And eventually the fighting that does happen between the characters is heartbreaking to watch, because again, you've seen this dynamic grow over the years with all of them. Everybody in this movie is so great. Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr., Both of them are fantastic over here. They do a really great job with the roles in this one. And you get some great supporting work from Scarlett Johansson, Sebastian Stan, Chadwick Boseman, Don Cheadle, Elizabeth Olsen, Paul Bettany, Paul Rudd, Anthony Mackie, and of course, one of the big character introductions in this one, Tom Holland, who plays this guy named Peter Parker who has spider powers. And obviously this was the big moment because I remember in 2014 after the Amazing Spider-Man 2 happened, that didn't do super well. And that was the second, Spider-Man that we'd had cinematically. Tobey Maguire had his trilogy, but then Amazing Spider-Man was cut short because 2 did not do well at all. And so then that's when Sony was like, all right, fine, give it a shot. We'll have Spider-Man in the MCU. And then Tom Holland comes in and immediately he won everybody over, and he did an excellent job as this character in the movie with the time that we had with him, and then of course in subsequent movies since, he's gone on to prove himself to be pretty damn great. And it's just been a joy to see this character sort of flourish along the way, but seeing his Spider-Man over here was awesome. Like, he did an incredible job, and he's really just in one major scene of the movie, which is that big fight sequence at the airport, which is a hell of an action sequence. Rewatching it, I was just thinking the action in this movie is really damn good. Everything from the start sequence where they're having this big fight where they're trying to stop an attack from Crossbones, played by Frank Grillo, and then eventually that outstanding car chase that happens in Bucharest as Bucky's being chased by Cap and Black Panther and all the authorities are trying to get them. That was a fantastic moment, and everything is so quick and intense over here. It's really, really well executed stuff. Bucky's rampage through the holding area where he's at and trying to get out, and all the characters trying to stop him. And there's one very intense moment with Tony as he shoots the repulsor in his hand. I mean, there are so many things like that really do stick out. Or Steve holding back the helicopter by just his bare hands. Like, that was pretty awesome. Like, you have those things like that in this movie that are just very, very well executed. But none of this really compares to what I think is my favorite fight in the movie. But to explain that, I'm going to have to talk about one of the characters I haven't mentioned anything about yet, and that being Daniel Bruhl as Zemo. When you find his motivation out, like what he's trying to do and how he's been doing it, on rewatch that works a lot better, and it's something that now, with hindsight of everything, it's really clear what his plan is and how he plays it out. And he's a very compelling character, and Daniel Bruhl is really, really good in the role. Rewatching this, they really struck gold with the casting, of course. I think Bruhl is a great actor. He's been great in pretty much everything that I've seen. But over here, just, to quietly be just some, mild-mannered guy. He was a soldier at one point. To just have him be like, hey, my family was in Sokovia when all of the stuff in Age of Ultron was going down, and then I found them all dead, and then I've been thinking about toppling an empire from the inside, which is basically the culmination of what Ultron was trying to do. He wanted, Wanda to tear them apart from the inside. But in a way, Zemo is the one who actually manages to really do that by the end of this movie, especially when it comes to the fight between Tony, Bucky, and Steve. That fight sequence is heartbreaking, and it also brings around what Bucky was up to in all the years that Steve was frozen, and had his work as the Winter Soldier, with that red book that has those code words in them that if you read them out loud, it sort of switches him, and it's very, very tense, and it's just, of course you find out this guy is a threat, but just the fact that one of his targets was Howard Stark and Maria Stark, and the fact that both of them were killed by him, obviously that sends Tony over the edge, and you very clearly then understand the motivations. And again, the movie sways that pendulum around and, whose side to really land on when it comes to the conversations being had in this movie. And the way the movie plays all of that, asking those questions, again, testament to the fact that they're able to do it as well as they are, while never skimping out on what makes the movie extremely entertaining, what makes these Marvel movies as interesting as they can be. This was, again, at the time when these movies had ramped up to a point where they were becoming major events. Civil War was this massive thing that happened in the comics. And I remember reading the comic before I watched the movie. things play out very differently in Civil War, the comic, as compared to how they play out in the movie. But in the movie's context, having it be around the fact that Cap is just trying to get his best friend back again, and that dynamic between Cap and Bucky sort of being reformed in the process, but in the middle of the most tense time to be a superhero, is again something that is, like, you couldn't have picked a worse time to have all of this happen. And again, the movie utilizes all of those things to the best of its potential. Something that I was thinking about from the first time I watched it to now is also how well they utilized someone like Scott. AntMan had just happened, and so you had just seen this character, and it was a fun movie. And to have him in this space, someone who's helping out Captain America and the team is like, okay, we need to, prevent some of this stuff from happening. And he already has a distrust for Stark thanks to all the stuff that Hank Pym has told him. And so to have him sort of take it on, and then the big surprise moment with him as he manages to turn himself into Giant Man, and then he's fighting everyone like this big Goliath figure, which, is genuinely awesome. Like, they did that scene incredibly too. I mean, it's one of those things where Scott's, more funny eccentricities made it through, and yet it never interfered with how the movie was supposed to play out, the intensity of those moments. I mean, every character really gets a chance to shine over here. There's some cool stuff with Wanda in here as well. I mean, you really get a chance with, to get a moment with every single character. I liked Clint showing up to help her. It's like, this makes sense. Clint has always sort of been in her corner, especially during Age of Ultron. I remember, like, he's the one who gives her the pep talk to really, get out there and fight. And so it almost feels like there's like a responsibility towards her, which also plays out very nicely. I remember for a long time before the movie came out, there was a ton of stuff going on surrounding Rhodey, because you would constantly see things in the trailers of him falling and being unconscious, so they kept playing up he might die in the movie. He does not die. He does get paralyzed a bit, but it is, there was a tense moment too, especially that being the finale of the big airport fight. Something that I also really liked is the movie's misleads. I mean, for the longest time, you're following along Zemo as it seems like his plan might be to, reawaken the other Winter Soldier candidates, others who are frozen in Siberia right now in cryo. And that's something that could be very, very dangerous. It's like, imagine, 6 Buckies going around, the world doesn't stand a chance. And just to have that eventually thwarted and be like subverted in a way, like, oh, actually, I don't need those guys. I mean, but they did the job enough. Like, it made you come here. Now that you're here, let me tell you what's really going on. And then having Tony witness, what Bucky really did. And eventually that final fight, brutal stuff, with Bucky trying to rip out the arc reactor at one point, his arm getting blasted up hard by Tony, then recreating the Civil War iconic shot from the comics. That was really cool too. And then there's the punch him up. Like, these two characters, Tony and Steve, are just getting bloody, punching against each other. It's very intense. I mean, Steve is like chipping away at his armor at one point, like almost like, ripping it to shreds. It's just very, very intense. And all the while that's happening, there's that other moment with Zemo and T'Challa, which I really loved, especially with T'Challa, like, decides, I'm not going to keep up with this revenge thing because of, look at what's doing to these guys. I'm done letting vengeance consume me. Great moment over there. And I liked his line where he finally does stop Zemo from killing himself, like, the living are not done with you yet. Yep. That's great. I actually have really great memories of Civil War overall. I've really enjoyed this movie since the time I've seen it, and tonight just reconfirmed that. I love the action sequences. They're all tremendous. The performances are really great. The characters are so well realized. The storytelling is very, very solid. It brings around Cap's arc really nicely too. I loved even the score. I think I had more appreciation for the score this time around than I did the first time. I remember the first time I heard it thinking, it's not as good as the Winter Soldier's one, but there's actually some really good stuff in this particular score too. Henry Jackman did a very good job. Visual effects were solid. It looks pretty cool. Genuinely, everything about it is very, very well realized. It's a very intense, fast-paced movie that refuses to let up, and it very firmly sits among my favorite MCU movies. It's gonna take some real, a ton of other stuff to really dethrone that from the top positions that it has. And I think it does deserve to be talked about in that breath quite often. I mean, really, these three Captain America movies that we got with Steve Rogers, with First Avenger being pretty solid, Winter Soldier and Civil War being in really fantastic stuff. It was a very good trilogy. I'm very excited to see what we're going to get with Brave New World, with Anthony Mackie taking on the mantle after Steve passed it on at the end of Avengers Endgame. And, just seeing that build from Falcon and the Winter Soldier as well. I'm very excited to see that. And so, looking forward to that movie. I cannot wait to talk about Brave New World. And that's where this ends. This is where it actually ends. So thank you so much for coming along on this journey. It means a lot to me. It's been really, really just the best time talking about these Marvel movies. I mean, there's so much fun stuff to revisit, and it's just really, really great, to just get to rewatch them every now and then. Looking forward to how the rest of 2025 is going to go. And as always, if you like this, please do subscribe. I will see you guys at the movies.